Number 1. Okay, so this event happened to me about 3 years ago, but some backstory is needed. I live in a small town outside of a big city in the southeast United States. I was a 23-year-old male at the time, and I had let myself go physically after high school, so I started biking to get back in shape. There was this old railroad that my town converted into a walking and biking trail a few miles from my house that I started biking to regularly because I liked the scenery. Most of the trail was pretty remote, but there were a few sections that passed by old neighborhoods. I would always bike during the afternoon and never felt threatened on the trail, as there were always other people there. But there was this one house next to the trail that was away from the other houses that looked abandoned and really creeped me out. It was large and very run down, and the yard was completely unkept, and paint was peeling off the side of the house. Now on to the story. I began night riding when I bought a light for my bike and started going down this trail often. One night I was biking on the trail and was coming up on the creepy house when I started hearing screams from inside it. I slowed down and I could hear a woman yelling stop and starting to cry. I got off my bike and decided to go in and help the woman because I did not have my cell phone to call the police. As I approached the house, I got a very bad vibe, but I ignored it as I needed to help the woman. I assumed that some guy was raping her, so I picked up a metal pipe that I found as I opened the door using my flashlight to light up the room as I entered. And as I made my way through the center of the room, I felt my heart drop, because I could see that there was a dim light illuminating the room and there was no woman. Instead, there was a cell phone on a small table making the screaming sounds. As I looked around more of the room, I saw 3 men that came out of the shadows from different angles around me. I yelled, "What do you want?" And none of them answered. But they all smiled at me, and one of them started to unbuckle his belt and move towards me. By this point I was freaking out and started looking for ways to get out of the house. But I could not go out the door because the biggest man got in front of it. So I looked around the room and saw 2 large windows that went almost all the way down to the floor, and it was on the one side that was not guarded. So I threw my pipe as hard as I could at one of the windows and covered my face as I jumped through it. I ran as fast as I could back to my bike and hauled ass back toward my car down the trail. As I was riding away, I could see that the 3 men on the trail were looking at me by the light of the moonlight. I got home and didn't call the police as I knew that they would be gone. But since that day, I always ride with a friend and never ride at night. And to the 3 men that I met that night, let's not meet again. Number 2. Okay, so this event happened to me a few years ago in the park behind my house. I was about 15 and I had experienced strange men following and talking to me before, so I knew how to act around them and how to avoid them. It is important to know that I live in a neighborhood where there's quite a bit of violence and occasionally a few shootings. This is very unusual due to the fact that I live in Australia in the suburbs. Anyway, on with the story. It was a nice, sunny Saturday afternoon, and I decided to take my dog for a walk around the block. The park behind my house joins the next street over to my street. It's like a big loop, so to get home, you walk through the park. My street and the one next to it also dead ends, and there are never any people around. It's very peaceful, but can get creepy at times. I used to walk past a man who kept a giant knife in his sock on my way home from school, and there have been a few times where the cops have been called out around night because of strange people in the park doing bad things. But during the day, it's pretty safe and quite beautiful. As I reached the beginning of the park, I saw a priest sitting on one of the park benches looking up at the trees. I didn't think much of him because we do surprisingly have 2 Greek churches in our neighborhood. He was an older man, maybe 60 to 65, so if he was going to make a move, I didn't think he could do much. I walked past him with my dog, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw him turn his head to look at me. I brushed it off because after all, I was the only other person in the park. But after I took about 5 more steps, I heard the leaves behind me crunching. So I looked back only to see the priest had gotten up and was slowly heading in my direction. At this point, I was a bit anxious, and he was starting to creep me out. But I pushed my thoughts aside and just said I was overthinking. I kept walking through the park about 250 meters to my house. The park is very open with only a few trees which are spread apart, so it's easy to see everything and everyone. As I walked home, I kept looking behind me and seeing where the priest was. He was still following me, and his steps were in sync with mine at this point. I was creeped out, but I didn't want to run in case he started running as well. I just acted casual, but kept a close eye on what he was doing. I was nearly at the end of the park and about to turn onto my street. I decided to look back at the priest one more time. This time, when I looked, he stopped walking and smiled at me, but not a normal smile. It was a big, creepy smile that gave me the chills. Even my dog noticed, and he started barking. And this snapped me back into reality, and I decided to bolt back to my house. As soon as I began running, the priest picked up his pace and started chasing after me. He caught up pretty quick for a guy his age. I was actually impressed for a second. He got close enough to reach his arm out in an attempt to grab the hood of my jacket. At that point, I screamed and was about to cry. I made it home, and luckily the door was unlocked. I got inside with the dog, and he was panting. I never told anyone what happened, but I continued to watch the priest from my kitchen window. He stood outside my home for a bit, trying to look in, but then he turned around and started to head back to the park. He looked as if he was mumbling something to himself. I don't know what he wanted, or what his intentions were, good or bad. But weird priests in the park, let's never meet. Number 3. Hey guys, this is my first time posting here, so here it goes. This event happened to me this spring 2015. So I'm a young adult male living in Toronto, Canada. I joined a fairly popular BDSM website mid-January and was instantly drawn into the community. For those of you who don't know, BDSM is a variety of erotic practices involving bondage, dominance, submission, and masochism. Think 50 Shades of Grey if that helps. The community welcomes all kinks and fetishes alike, and everyone I've ever met from that site has been very welcoming and friendly, except for one. It all started with me coming across her profile. She was a gorgeous woman, very fit with long legs and firm breasts. She was an older woman, but I was into that. I started by browsing her collection of photos, mostly fairly vanilla images of her sitting at a dining room table, drinking a glass of wine and smiling at the camera. Real classy, which just urged me forward. I went ahead and messaged her. I wrote the usual greetings and offered to chat and get to know each other. She replied almost instantly. She greeted me as Sir, given the role I take. We continued to message back and forth for a week or two. She explained to me that she wanted me to be her master since her last master died in a car accident. This was odd to me, but unfortunate accidents can happen to anyone, right? She continued giving me details of what she wanted me to do to her, and I very much obliged. In the next couple of days, we kept trying to meet up for coffee, but unfortunately she had to cancel at the last minute each time. Eventually I began getting very eager as all the kinky discussions had got me worked up. So late one night, she messages me inviting me over to her place. She explained to me that she doesn't work in the morning so that we can be up all night having our fun. Well, being worked up and having the lack of necessary blood flow to my brain to make an educated decision, I agreed and asked her for her address. She messaged me an address along with her phone number, and I got ready to leave. So I got in my car and plugged in my address into the GPS, and this is where I noticed she lived in Hamilton, which is about 45 minutes away from Toronto. It's currently 1 a.m., but this didn't bother me as I drove to Hamilton quite often, and considering I'd be spending the night there, I could just leave in the morning. 45 minutes later, I found myself passing Hamilton. Okay, so it's a little further than that. No big deal. But then I reached a stretch of highway with no streetlights, and this is where I started to get very concerned, as only my headlights were lighting the way. Suddenly, my GPS chimed in with the female voice indicating my exit. It was coming up on the right, and I feared driving into the darkness off the mild comfort of the highway. The exit took me onto a long, dark stretch of country road, and my lights were starting to dim as they passed the silhouettes of farmhouses and forestry, with a good distance between them. My GPS chimed again, indicating that my destination was coming on my left, but as I approached the location, it was not even close to what I expected. It was a small church with one yellow street light illuminating the dirt lot in front of it. I pulled onto the lot and took a closer look with my vehicle's headlights pointing at the building. The windows and doors were boarded up, and definitely not recently, as the wood seemed weather-worn. My blood began to run cold as I made sure my doors were locked and my windows were rolled up. But the full tank of gas gave me some sort of comfort in this situation. I figured she possibly made an error in typing out her address, and so I called the number she gave me. But then I got the error noise. The number you are trying to reach is no longer in service. Okay, at this point I'm getting ready to turn around and leave until I noticed my phone alerting me that there was an email. It was a message from her. "Hey, I see you there. It's not the church. My place is the last small house behind the church." All I could do is replay all of the horror movies I'd seen throughout my life and just couldn't believe I could possibly be living one for real. However, a small jolt of curiosity persuaded me forward, even if just to take a look at this house. There was a small path beside the church, and I slowly pulled up onto it. As I crept my car forward, a little farmhouse poked itself out of the trees at the top of the hill. At this point, I was certain I'm not going in there. I made the decision in my head that my own survival took precedency over my need for sex. I was about to reverse out when I saw a man come at the top balcony of the building. A hooded figure stepped out, but I could tell that it was a man because of the facial features that he had. He stood there for about 30 seconds and motioned his head in a way that I recognized as the universal sign for "look behind you." Then I felt the metal handle on the outside of my door being pulled at. I quickly turned my head in the direction to see the woman from the profile photos, hunched over, pressing her face up against the window. My heart leapt out of my chest as I stared at the horrifying smile. The best way that I can describe her expression would be any creepy cartoon image of the Joker you've ever seen. It was undoubtedly her behind that insane grin that only made her look older. She whispered through the glass, "Open the door, baby." I was frozen in my seat, unsure to how to respond or what to do next, so I just sat there, continuing to stare at her like an idiot. Her face then quickly fell into angry, malicious mode as she continued to violently jiggle at the door handle. Then she yelled at the top of her lungs, "Open the door now!" This locked me into panic mode, and I pressed my foot onto the gas, and my car, set in reverse, began to pull out of the pathway backwards. The woman tried holding onto the door handle, only to let go shortly after being dragged off her feet. I flew down the dark road towards the highway, almost triple the speed limit, just in case they had a car following me. I called a friend of mine who I also met in the same website. She lived in Hamilton and insisted I come stay at her place. When I got there, she poured me a cold glass of Coke Zero as I explained to her what happened. She told me that she read an article in the local newspaper over a week ago regarding an older couple luring men out to their farm. I stopped her right there, as I didn't want to be freaked out even more than I currently was. So, crazy potential murderous woman. Let's never meet. Number 4. It's been around 4 years since this happened, and I was in middle school at the time, but only very recently have I understood what has happened. As a middle schooler, I used to play tennis a lot. In my school, you were given the option to play tennis instead of normal PE, which I hated. I was a part of the tennis program since I was in elementary school, so I knew the coaches very well. Around my 7th grade year, they hired a new coach. He was a nice older man named Ron. He was the coach of the section I would play, so for the entire year, we would have lessons every day. Now, I wasn't alone in these classes, as there would usually be about 4 other kids with us. Ron was nice. He would let us do fun tennis mini-games where he would incorporate Disney shows or cartoons into the mix. He seemed to know a lot about kids shows, but never had any children. He would also ask us if we saw the latest episode of Shake It Up, and he was serious. He would actually watch those shows and ask us about it. I thought it was kind of funny at the time, but looking back now, it was just weird. So flash forward a year and the summer is over. I'm back to school. It's my first day of classes for the 8th grade year, and I go to tennis. Immediately I'm greeted by Ron, and he asked me about my summer. Nobody was around yet, and I was sort of uncomfortable being alone. He says to me, "You've grown quite tall this summer. You're getting big. I wonder what else of yours has grown and is big now." He kept eyeing me down while he said that. But at the end of the sentence, he focused his eyes at my crotch area. He kept staring at my crotch for a good 30 seconds, silent, until the main coach comes over, pats him on the back, and tells him to start the lesson. That day, nobody else was there for my section, so I was alone with Ron. He insisted on touching me and showing me how to handle the racket, even though I'd been playing tennis for 4 years then, so I knew how to properly swing, and he knew that. He was also quite forceful, and I just remember being very uncomfortable. Luckily, more people came into my section as the year went on, so I was no longer alone with Ron. I eventually graduated middle school and went to high school on a different campus and never met Ron again. I didn't really realize what he meant when he said what else had grown until about a few months ago when I thought about it again. It turns out that only a few months into the next school year after I graduated, they fired the coach for unknown reasons. But some parents were told that he was fired for turning out to be a pedophile. A friend of mine actually saw Ron a few weeks ago when he went into a taxi and he was their driver. Ron immediately recognized my friend, and my friend just got out of the taxi and left. So Ron, let's not meet again. Number 5. This event happened to me and my buddy last year, right before the start of deer season. My buddy and I have been hunting public game lands together for years, and we've been pretty successful, mostly because we put a lot of time before deer season starts looking for deer trails and sources of food and water. One day, my friend and I were walking on a game land that we had not been on before, and came to a part of the woods that started to get pretty dense when we noticed a body lying on the ground. We quickly went over to it and saw that the person was in fact dead. It was a white girl, maybe in her 20s. She had long brown hair and brown eyes. She had a slim build and was wearing jeans and a long sleeve shirt. We noticed that it looked like she had been strangled to death, and also noticed that her body was still warm, meaning that she must have been killed very recently. This was obviously very unsettling to us, as we could not understand how a person could just kill this woman and dump her body in the woods. I remember having a range of emotions pass over me, from anger to being scared that the killer was still around. So I looked up and started to scan the area around me to see if we were not alone. And a couple seconds later, I saw something in the distance. To the right of us, there was a slight clearing about 200 yards away, and I saw a man in black jeans and a black t-shirt staring at us. As soon as I looked at him, he started running in our direction at full speed, and it looked like he was holding a handgun. At this point, my friend and I started to run in the opposite direction as we were unarmed. The problem was that the dense woods slowed us down a lot, and the man started to gain on us as where he was had less trees. As we tried to run faster, we saw a series of low spots that looked like natural ditches in front of us that were deep enough to hide in. So we both went to the furthest one and lied down as to be out of sight. A few seconds later, with his gun drawn, the man came to the ditches and started to look around. Thankfully, all the noise that we were making startled the deer on the other side of the ditches near him, and it started to run away from us. The man must not have seen the deer and thought that it was us, because he ran after the sound into the woods. Knowing that this was our chance, we got up and quietly went back to our truck and drove away. We called the police as soon as we hit the main road and told them where to find the body and gave them the best description that we had of the man. They called us back a few days later and told us that they did not have the body and they never found the man. To this day, my friend and I will not go back to that game land, and we always bring handguns with us when we go scouting in the woods. Hey guys, what's going on? This is Super 320 Man, and this is a series I've always wanted to do. I've always liked horror movies and horror stories, so I'm going to start kicking one of these out probably about once a week. And I hope you enjoy, and if you like them, please subscribe and share my videos. Until next time, sleep lightly.